Good day, everybody. This is Michael Leveris from JurisQ.com. We are a legal network of attorneys in different states, various practice areas, and we do legal FAQs, frequently asked questions on law from the public. Today, we bring back Alla Kurolapnik, a divorce attorney in New York that is a very big advocate that advises people whenever you can to use mediators in a divorce. But sometimes you can use mediators throughout the whole process. You can use mediators partially whenever it's appropriate. Can you please tell us when that's appropriate? Use partial, use mediators partially, and give us an example of in your recent practice where you thought that was a good use of mediators.
Sure. So, again, mediators take on such a wide variety of roles. We have in New York, and you and I have spoken about this off camera and on camera as well. We have what's called a presumptive ADR program in the New York courts. And, the courts try to now utilize in certain cases mediation. And there's a panel of neutral mediators. I sit on the panel in New York County, in Nassau County, and in Richmond County in New York. And those cases are farmed out to mediators. And sometimes they're just rolled out for specific issues. So for instance, custody or finances or both, right? Because that's the way the court generally looks at cases. Let's talk about the children and let's talk about custody. After that's resolved, let's talk about the finances, unless there's some hot issues that need to be dealt with right away, in which case there's motion practice, right? So that's where I often see a lot of times mediation used. In fact, in one of my cases now, litigated case that I have, we went to the parties have been trying to resolve the case, try to reach a global resolution for about a year and a half before involving the courts. Finally, we decided to get the courts involved because we saw we weren't really getting anywhere. And the court had asked us whether or not we wanted to engage the parties, the other attorney and I, in mediation. And we said, why not? Let's give it a shot. In 2 mediation sessions, the parties resolved custody. What we couldn't accomplish for 2 years.
Unbelievable.
Because the mediator
piece you could save with that.
Right.
Frustration.
Exactly. And all it took is a conversation to happen in a forum where the mediator really facilitated a conversation to happen. So that's a great example of when that's done. Now, once we finish doing the custody aspect, unfortunately, we're not in a position to settle finances. I think, in my opinion, there's a lot of distrust from the opposing side about what my client has discovered, provided in discovery, which again, they think there's more, and no matter how much I tell them that there isn't, or my client says that there isn't, they have the right to explore that. Discovery is a fishing expedition, for a lack of a better word. So they have the right until they figure out that there really isn't something else there, and maybe perhaps then we can return back to mediation. But until that happens, that's a perfect example of where we can, spot resolve certain issues. In another area that I've often used it is, as a negotiating attorney, because again, part of the art of mediation and negotiation and trying to, help parties divorce in a non-adversarial way is attorney negotiations, right? So that's where both parties are represented by counsel, and we sort of go through, we exchange the variety of paperwork that we need to, the finances, we discuss, the custodial arrangements of their children, and then there's some proposals that start going back and forth about how we propose that a case can get settled. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen even in my own work, you get stuck on an issue and it's so minor that the parties are spending so much more, I guess, time and money in counsel fees trying to have the attorneys work out that issue that it's probably best addressed in mediation. For instance, Pets are a great example of that.
Okay.
There's a slew of litigation and now legislation about pet ownership and pets, how they are viewed in a divorce. Long time ago, pets used to be viewed as property. So when you were dividing property, you would divide pets. Then the status kind of changed, and courts started looking at it as more of like what's best for this pet, right? And how do you determine that?
Like a
You start
child.
looking at, right, well, not really, because they didn't look at it as custody, but they really started looking at it from what would be most appropriate for everyone. What would be best for the pet and most appropriate for everyone? So you started analyzing things like who was the person at home who took the pet out for walks, who fed the pet, who took the pet to the vet, right? Who the pet, like, the attachment. If there are children, are the children attached to the pets? How would you split the time if if you have two households, if you're not living together anymore? So those kind of issues, for instance, and there is legislation on it now. And look, I mean, some families they don't have children, they have pets, which they think of as their children, right? So it's a very important issue to a lot of people. And the question is, how do you deal with it? I find personally, and in my work, that it's almost best to always leave that up to the parties to really talk through it with mediation, because a mediator is going to create that open space or facilitate that discussion where you can really talk about those issues. So if for whatever reason in a proposal, when you're negotiating an agreement or a global resolution of a divorce, I find that there are pets and we can't really resolve that issue. I see that where, heads are locked on that issue. I'll suggest that the parties try speaking to a mediator about it, because I found that to be super helpful. In the same sense, I found that, having a parent coordinator or a mediator help the parties through custody issues is really also a helpful tool. Some parties are just not in a position to really um, in their minds. It's an divorce is a very emotional
Right.
thing. So it's financial, it's emotional, it's psychological. There's a variety of things that happen to a person going through a divorce. And sometimes they just can't get their heads wrapped around the fact that they're no longer going to be an intact family, right? And that, again, I had a whole segment on this, I think maybe perhaps with you or somewhere else, where it's the element of surprise in a divorce sometimes, because inevitably there's always one person in the divorce who's been thinking about this situation, who's been pondering about, for a lack of a better term, an exit strategy, right? And there's the other person who hasn't. And sometimes it hits you like out of the blue, and where one spouse has had a significant amount of time to come to terms with the fact that they're ready to live separate and apart and create an individual identity from the other spouse. The spouse who just like has been hit in the face with it didn't know it was coming. So now it's going to take an equally long period of time for that person to wrap their mind around the fact that, okay, we're no longer going to be an intact family. What does that mean? Financially, what does that mean for our children? What does that mean for our household? So with respect to children in those particular, or custody arrangements in those particular cases, I also find it most helpful to be able to utilize a parent coordinator to really help the parties talk through and provide helpful tools how to deal with the initial day-to-day, so they're in a position where they can really make a formal decision about which way custody is going to go. In other words, how the decisions are going to be made for the children, how the day-to-day is going to be handled, where the kids are going to, some kind of an access schedule, like a holiday schedule, or anything else that comes up from time to time that can really help these parties navigate that with the help of either a mediator or a parent coordinator, which will then help the attorneys craft this into an agreement for the parties.
All right. Thank you so much for explaining so beautifully and giving us examples where mediation can play an important role, a partial role, or an important role in resolving a conflict. I like the example with the animals. That's a very big novelty for me and for a lot of listeners about how the new status of how animals are treated now. I mean, I would probably go a different way. Just have the judge say, let's cut the animal in half. Whoever object the most gets the animal. But then I saw from King Solomon. Okay, Alla, on that right note, we thank you. Thank you for educating us about divorce law, about mediation. Really appreciate it. And if anybody has any specific questions on their situation, on their divorce, please feel free to call the phone number on the bottom of the screen. Thank you. Thank you, Alla. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.